Today is a special day in Chabad. Originally, I was going to do it for Farbrengen at the shul, for those who know what a Farbrengen is, but since I have this nosy nose, I decided not to do it. But it's a very special day in Chabad. If you saw my email, it's the day that the previous Rebbe passed away, and it's the day that his son-in-law, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, took upon himself the leadership of Chabad. And it's a very big day in Crown Heights and New York and all over the Chabad world. Everybody is celebrating this day. And we're going to celebrate it by studying some of the Rebbe's teachings, which many of our classes are based on his teachings. And therefore, it's a reason for us to celebrate too on this day, because ultimately, because of the Rebbe accepting upon himself the leadership, spent 42 years just giving, and his talks are hundreds of volumes of talks and just ideas that the Rebbe gave. And not only that, but he gave so many great leaders that we have today, the push to be leaders themselves. I'm sure you know Lord Jonathan Sachs. For those who know Rabbi Steinsaltz also. Many great luminaries were pushed by the Rebbe to bring their leadership a step forward. And as I think it was Lord Jonathan Sachs said, great leaders create followers and great leaders create leaders. And so that's really what's important to us, is that we have to become leaders ourselves. And we should take that message. And that was really what the Rebbe's message was when he accepted leadership, is it's not that you rely on me, but you all should become leaders in your own way, in your own sense, and reach out to others. And that message will tie in once we get to the end of today's class. So to give you a little bit of an idea what we're going to talk about, we're going to have a nice discussion about the parasha, mostly about the gold. What did I call it? The gold. I keep forgetting. It's not gold diggers, because gold diggers is a whole other thing. We're going to spend most of our time talking about the gold. Man, I don't remember.
Gold chasers.
Gold chasers. Yeah, we're going to talk mostly about the gold chasers. And then we're going to end off with the gold digger and, the grave digger, and understand what that means to us. But we will spend today's, so really, if you want to say, although it is one idea that's presented at the end, but mostly we're going to focus on the gold diggers, and that has its own lesson. And then we're going to get at the end to the grave digger, and that has its own lesson. So let's jump right in. We have to start off with a joke, but instead of a joke, I'm going to start off with a riddle. And my riddle for today is, name to me 3 days in a row, not including Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Shabbos. So name to me 3 days in a row that doesn't include Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Shabbos. All right, the answer is what?
You got the 1st of January, the 2nd of January, and the 3rd of January.
Good. All right, you're good. I was going to say yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Okay, good. Thinking out of the box. Box. Very good. Exactly. So instead of a joke, we had a riddle. I hope my riddles are better than my jokes, but that's how it goes. So why am I focusing on the number 3? Because 3 days is one of the oddest requests in the Torah. One of the strangest requests in the Torah includes 3 days. Who asked for 3 days? Any thoughts? Who asked for 3 days? Moses. When the Jewish people were asking to leave the land of Egypt, if you actually read the story, a lot of people don't get into the details. If you actually read the details of the story, Moses was only asking for a 3-day vacation so that they could head out and serve God. Okay, so he was asking, please give us 3 days. Our God appeared to us. He wants us to head out in the desert and pray to him for 3 days. And that was always the back and forth. If you look in some areas, Pharaoh tells him, okay, I'll let you go, but you could go, but only the men, not the women. Only the men need to pray. No, he says, no, I need the men and the women. And he says, okay, you could go with the women, but not the animals. He says, no, we need the animals too. For maybe he needs sacrifices. Then they go, and then he says, not only we need the animals, we need your animals too, in case God asks of us different things. And when you think about it, it's strange. If you've got the power of the 10 plagues, and you've got the power of God behind you, why would you be asking for 3 days? Now, this is a topic that I've spoken about in sermons a couple times during different years. And today we're going to focus on a very simple answer. When you actually read some more details of the story, you will see what was gained by asking for 3 days. In other words, from a very tactical perspective, the Jewish people gained a lot by asking for 3 days. So what did they gain? Let's take a look at a text over here. Something very interesting. By the way, for those who have joined my classes, and sometimes I show the videos and you only see the subtitles when I share a video. I figured out the trick behind it. But anyways, so here's a text over here in Exodus 11:2, and God tells Moshe, please speak to the people discreetly and let each man request gold and silver articles from his friend. Let every woman make the same request of her friends. Now, so it says, please speak. God didn't say, I command you. It was like God was begging. God said, please ask. Now, because the Jewish people had only said, now what's interesting is it says they should borrow. That's actually the Hebrew. I don't know why the translation is not there. It says, v'yish'alu. Lish'ol means to borrow in Hebrew. It says, speak to them and they should borrow. Request. The word request actually means they should request to borrow. So God said, God told the Jewish people, go to the Egyptians and request to borrow their gold and silver. Now, what does it mean to borrow? To take, right? No. Since the Jewish people were only planning on leaving officially for 3 days, so when they came to the Egyptians, they said, we're heading out for 3 days. Can we lend some of your gold and silver? So purely from a tactical perspective, asking for 3 days allowed the Jewish people to collect much gold and silver because the Egyptians were more willing to give up with it, feeling that they were lending something. Okay. Now that is one reason why asking for 3 days was good. The other reason is when Pharaoh chased after the Jewish people. Anybody knows, why did Pharaoh chase after the Jewish people? What does the Torah say? Why did Pharaoh chase after the Jewish people? They left Egypt, they were heading to the sea, then Pharaoh chases after them. Why did Pharaoh chase after the Jewish people? What was his reason?
I thought he changed his mind, no?
Right, a lot of people think he changed his mind, but what does the Torah actually say?
God hardened his heart.
Yes, God did harden his heart because it is foolish to chase them. But what would be the reason? Why did he decide to chase them?
I thought he wanted to bring them back.
Right. Why?
Probably need the slaves. Probably needed, the labor.
Yeah. So the Torah says, let me pull it up over here. So the Torah says something very interesting. The Torah says it was told to Pharaoh. Let me show you the verse over here. So this is in the beginning of our parsha. So this is Exodus chapter 13. Actually, chapter 14. It says over here, verse 5, chapter 14, it was reported to Pharaoh that the people had fled. And the Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart towards the people. And they said, what is this that we have done, that we have released Israel from serving us? So what does it mean? It was reported to Pharaoh the people had fled. Like, didn't he tell them to leave? What does it mean? Oh my gosh, they left, right? You told them to leave. What does it mean? It was reported to him that they had left. So actually, the commentaries point out that, again, Pharaoh had an understanding that the Jewish people were going to leave for 3 days. And so it says he actually, even when he sent them out, he sent spies with them. And after 3 days, these spies, or maybe they weren't spies, they could have been open about it. They said, why are you not turning back? They said, oh, we have no intention of turning back. So these spies came back to Pharaoh And they told him the people are running away. Now, yes, he still had to have a hard heart because you still have to be an idiot to chase after the Jews after they just hit you with 10 plagues. So yes, it does have to do with a hard heart. But that's why he's like, oh my gosh, we let them go and they ain't coming back. And that's when he decided to, and obviously, like you said, it says in verse 8, and the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh. But this is what it means. It was reported to Pharaoh the people have fled. So again, why did he think they fled? Was because he had sent them away for 3 days. Now, how did Pharaoh, think about this, how did Pharaoh convince the people to chase after the Jews? We already know the people were sick of Pharaoh keeping the Jews. Now the Jews finally left. They finally have the curse of the Jews away from them. The 10 plagues. It's gone. It's finished. And then he tells his people, hey, guess what? The Jews are not coming back. Let's go chase after them. Like, which idiot Egyptian is going to want to do that?
The ones where they took all their gold and silver and their animals and everything else.
Exactly.
The Egyptians had nothing.
Exactly. So from a very technical perspective, it was a brilliant idea to say 3 days, and then they borrowed. And now the Egyptians, who never thought they were giving away their gold and silver, says, hey, we want to get back our gold and silver. So again, for 2 reasons, it was a great tactical thing to say 3 days. The Jewish people borrowed the gold and silver. And now, as you said, Pharaoh had a very easy rallying cry because we know people, when it comes to money, will do irrational things, right? So if people are afraid their gold is going to disappear, especially when it's yours, they were very willing to go into battle against the Jewish people and get back their gold and their silver. Now, so that's the story of the Exodus. They said it was 3 days so they could get the gold and silver, and then the Egyptians chased after them. And it says that in addition to the gold and silver they collected in Egypt itself, it says back in those days, you wanted to be an impressive army. To be an impressive army, you had to adorn your chariots and your horses and everything else. And so Pharaoh and the Egyptians, they came out to battle with a lot of riches. And that's another way that the Jewish people got a lot of riches. And so today we're like I said, for right now, we're focusing on the gold chasers. So we're focusing on the Jews. They were gold chasers, okay? They were heading after the gold. Now, this may sound anti-Semitic. Just is what it is. It's what we were commanded to do. And we'll see why. It is actually an interesting thing that the Jewish people spend so much time trying to get the gold and the silver, and I'll explain why that's an interesting thing in a moment. Let's take a look over here. So we said earlier, when God told the Jewish people to borrow silver and gold, he told them, it says, God said, please speak to the people. God said, please ask the Jewish people to collect gold and silver. Why did God have to beg? A, why does God need to beg people to collect gold and silver? Who doesn't want to do it? And B, even if they don't want to do it, why doesn't God give a command? What's the please over here? You don't see God saying please a whole bunch when you read the Torah. I know God has manners, but he doesn't need to say please. So Rashi says like this, please speak. The verse is saying that I ask you to warn them about this, i.e. to ask their neighbors for vessels, so that the righteous man Abraham will not say that God fulfilled with them his promises, and they will enslave them and oppress them, but did not fulfill with them the conclusion of his promise. Afterwards, they will go forth with great possessions. So in other words, God was saying, please collect the gold and silver. Why? This goes back to the history. The Brit Bein HaBasarim, the covenant between the parts. God made a covenant between the parts, and that's in Genesis. Let me see if I can pull it up over here. And over there, God told Abraham that your children will be sojourners in a foreign land. However, eventually I will take them out. So it's Genesis 15. Genesis 15, Chabad. Let's pull up the, let's show you what it says over here. Is this it? Yeah, okay. So let's pull up the verses. What did God tell Abraham? What did God promise Abraham? And he said to Abram, his name was Abram then, it wasn't Avraham then yet, you shall surely know that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. So he was already prophesying to them they would be exiled to a land that's not theirs, and they will enslave them, sounds like Egypt, and oppress them for 400 years. And we speak about the number many times. And also the nation that they will serve, I will judge, and afterwards they will go forth with great possessions. So to speak, God is telling him, I got good news and I got bad news for you. Right? I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is, well, sorry, he starts with the bad news. He says, the bad news is your kids, they're going to be exiled, and they're going to be enslaved, and they're going to be oppressed. But the good news is eventually they'll leave and they'll get money. So God, when the Jewish people are about to leave Egypt, he says, please, you better go collect that money, because otherwise Abraham is going to have a bone to pick with me. He's going to say, look, you enslaved them, you oppressed them, and they didn't get the money. Not fair. Is that no fair? It's not fair. Let me ask you a question. I mean, I understand that God had to fulfill his promise to Abraham, but why is that even a thing? Like, how does that even like fit? Like, you know, imagine I could promise you, guess what? You are going to spend 60 years in one of Stalin's gulags in Siberia, and after that, you'll get a lot of gold and silver. I'm like, sorry, you know, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. No, sign up somebody else. It's not worth it. So, you know, we have to understand what is the meaning behind this promise. And we see God was very careful about this promise, because also from the Jewish people's perspective, also, if you think about it from their perspective, like, they're kind of like, let's get out of here. You know, why do we need to go collect the gold and silver? Let's get out of here. But no, it's a mitzvah for God. You got to go collect the gold and silver, you know? Like, there's many cases like that. People who are in gulags and prisons, and they said, you know, you can stay an extra day, get more money, or leave now, right? And they might offer to leave now. You don't know what tomorrow brings. So this is a question on one story of gold chasers. What was so important about this gold? That God made a big stink about it. First, he promises it to Abraham, which is a strange promise, like, just don't oppress them. And then later on, he has to beg the Jewish people to do it. He makes this whole trickery, 3 days, so that the Egyptians will give him the money. What is going on? Now we're going to add another element to the gold chasers. The Jewish people did not only chase gold when they were in Egypt, but even once they were out of Egypt. So as we said before, after the Jewish people left Egypt, Pharaoh heard the Jewish people were not planning on coming back. He chases after them, and he meets them at the Sea of Reeds. And over there, God does a wondrous miracle. God splits the sea. And this is always one of my favorite examples of a real addict. Pharaoh is a real addict. He's like the most addicted person to his Jews I've ever seen. He's such an addict. What do I mean? Like, if you were there and God split the sea for the Jewish people, like, how stupid could you be to say, oh, God probably split the sea so I could chase after the Jews and kill them, right? This is the most stupid thing. But that's what Pharaoh does. He says, oh, look, God makes the splitting of the sea. Probably he wants to keep the sea open so I could go chase after the Jews and kill them. So Pharaoh heads off into the sea after the Jews. And of course, the whole sea collapses over him, right? It's like, you know, imagine you're chasing after your enemy, and then your enemy offers you, you know, a nice Lamborghini. You know, if you're in the army, like, there's probably some self-destructing bombs in that Lamborghini or something. You know, it's like, I'm not stepping into that. Anyway, so Pharaoh, he's an addict. What can I say? He's pretty crazy. So Pharaoh chases after the Jews into the sea. They jump into the sea, and of course, the Jewish people come out of the other side, and they see how all the Egyptians are destroyed. But even more than that, it says the sea spit out not only the Egyptians, but also their money. Again, the sea spit out not only the Egyptians, but also their money. So let me show you in the text. Let's go over here. Okay. It says over here. The bottom. Vayosha Hashem Bayoma. We say this prayer every day. Vayosha Hashem Bayoma et Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim. And on that day, God saved the Jewish people from the hands of the Egyptians. Vayar Yisrael et Mitzrayim, and the Jewish people saw the Egyptians met al Sefat Hayam, dead on the seashore. Why was that important? Because they had to know there is no more threat. The threat is over. However, Rashi adds over here. Vayar Yisrael et Mitzrayim met. Rashi says, "Shapalatatan hayam al Sefato." The sea spewed them out onto the shore. Kadesh lo yom Yisrael, so the Jews should not say, "Kishem shanu olam mitzad zeh." Just like they are coming up from this side, they are also coming up from the other side. They're coming up for someone else, they're going to chase after them. But if the Egyptians were spit out, we're told that they also were spit out with lots and lots of riches. And that is why it says, Vayasa, right after that, the Torah says, Vayasa Moshe Yisrael miyam. So Moshe led the Israelites away from the Red Sea. It says like, Vayasa means like forcibly, like imagine you take a kid. All right, we're leaving Busch Gardens, right? Vayasa. Moshe had to take the Jewish people away from the sea. Why did Moshe have to take the Jewish people away? So Rashi says, he led them against their will. For the Egyptians adorned their horses with gold, silver, and precious stones. And the Jews would find them in the sea. And the spoils they obtained by the sea were more than they got in Egypt. Therefore, you had to make the move. They had so much gold and silver over there. They were in no rush. How much gold and silver did they collect? Just to give an idea, the Talmud says that every Jew would be in the Forbes 500. Okay, what do I mean? Let's take a look. The Talmud says there was not one member of the Jewish people who did not have 90 Nubian donkeys, which are considered to be of the superior quality, with him laden with silver and gold of Egypt. See, each one had 90 donkeys with gold and silver. Now, whether that is exact or exaggeration, which we discussed in Midrashim again, it's not important. What's important is they definitely walked away with loads and loads of cash. They were extremely, extremely wealthy. So all this leads us to something interesting. That again, it seems that getting wealth out of Egypt was an important thing. That not only when the Jews were in Egypt, they had to get the wealth of the Egyptians, but even once they left, they needed the Egyptians to chase after them and bring them even more gold and silver. Why was that? Why was it so important? Why was the money thing so important? To the point where they had to, God set up this whole trick so they could get all the money and then trick the Egyptians, chase after them, get more money. And more importantly, why did God promise Abraham? Why was it even part of the original promise they would get money? Like, it doesn't like sweeten the deal, it doesn't like, they'll be in prison for 400 years, but they'll also get gold and silver at the end. Like, it doesn't really make it that much better. So what's going on over here? Any thoughts, questions, or comments before I get to the answer? Nope. No? Anybody knows the answer? Any thoughts? No? If you really know the answer, don't tell me. But if you think you know the answer, tell me. Okay. So in order to get to the next part, we have to give you a little bit of a Hasidic background. Because really the only way to answer this question is going a little mystical, because there is a story behind the story. In other words, there's got to be more to than what the eye sees. Gold and silver is great, but it's not the be all end all, especially in a religious life. So anybody ever heard here about the shattering of the vessels? If you've spent any time any Hasidus or any Kabbalah, you may have heard about the shattering of the vessels. Yes? The shattering of the vessels. What is the shattering of the vessels? So we are told that before this world that we live in, there was another more spiritual world called Tohu. If you know the word Tohu, that is because in the beginning of the Torah uses the word Tohu. It says, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashmayim veit haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. V'haaretz haita tohu vavohu, and the world was utter chaos. Right, so it starts out the world was utter chaos. So the word tohu means chaos. So we are told before the physical world we live in, there was a very chaotic world. Now, why would a spiritual world be chaotic? And the answer is because it says, simply put, there was a lot of light and a lack of vessel. I'll say that again. The spiritual world had a lot of light and lack of vessel. So, for example, let's say you are a person who has great ideas, but you are not properly able to express yourself. You're very bad at expression, very bad at presentation. And so you will walk around in life, you will look around at people and things, and you'll have a lot of brilliant ideas about it, but you cannot communicate it very well, and it gets you very, very frustrated, right? So that would be an example of a lot of light and a lack of vessel. You have these great ideas, great thoughts, you have trouble sharing with the world. That's why sometimes I believe some great people are abyssal mashugga, as we say. They're a little crazy. Why are they a little crazy? Because they have a lot of light, a lot of great ideas. They can't express it. These energies are not defined enough to allow it to work properly. But even more than that, when you have energy that is unbounded, it also has trouble meshing. Very strong personalities a lot of times have trouble getting along with other people, especially if they lack what we might call the vessels. They might have not read Dale Carnegie's book or whatever it is. People who are very skilled but very focused on their own skill and what they can do very well. They don't mesh with others. We might put them in their own place, in their own thing. We might call them a nerd, whatever we call them. They don't do well with other people. It says the same thing. There are 10 energies with which God creates this world. For those who've learned about the 10 sefirot, there are 10 divine expressions. They're known as kindness, severity, beauty, and so on and so forth. Knowledge, wisdom, understanding, all these powers of expression. When it is too much, it cannot get along with others. When there's a lack of vessel, when it's not contained, it cannot integrate. And so that's really what the world of Tohu was. The world of Tohu was an amazingly spiritual world, but the kindness was so focused on kindness, the expression of kindness, that it didn't mesh with judgment. And so they just bounced off each other. And so everything really fell apart. That's really what it says. It says everything fell apart. This is known in the Kabbalah as the shattering of the vessels. The vessels couldn't contain the lights. The lights were too big. They kept hitting each other. And let's call it, there was a nervous breakdown, so to speak. And so then we have our world. Our world doesn't have a lot of divine spiritual light that you can see. So that's not the problem. The divine spiritual light is not going to have a problem, each one competing with each other. But that's also the problem, is we don't see the divine very much. And it says within this world, these spiritual sparks from the previous world, from the world of Tohu, the world of chaos, they're all hidden in this world, sprinkled in lots and lots of different places. And so we have to find these sparks and elevate them. It says that's why, for example, it says in the verse in Deuteronomy, I should pull this up, it's a very interesting verse, but it brings out this point, the idea of finding the vessels. Let's look in Deuteronomy 8:3. And of course, whenever you search for a verse online, you have to make sure that you type in the word Chabad after it, because otherwise you might come up with a different Bible. So the Deuteronomy says, where is it? Ki lo alalechem. Did I pull it up? I may not have found it. Oh, yes, here it is. Very interesting verse when you look at it. It says, I was talking about the manna. It says, he would make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but rather by whatever comes forth from the word of the Lord does man live. So what that means is that we are not alive because of the bread itself. We are alive because of the word of God that is within the bread. From the word of the Lord does man live. So it's a very interesting thing the Baal Shem Tov took from this, that when you eat bread, what makes you desire the bread? On a very physical level, you want the bread because you're hungry. But he says the deeper desire, why are you hungry, is because there's a spark in there that when you eat that bread, you elevate it. It's the same thing it says, why do we let's say, get an itch to go on a vacation somewhere? If you want to go to North Carolina or Tennessee or New York, it says the same reason is externally, we think I want to go on vacation. But internally, it says our soul is leading us there because there's a spark there in that place that we're going to that we can elevate. That's anything we desire is because internally our godly soul has something there that we want to elevate. Now, obviously, that does not apply to sinful things. Okay, so nobody tell me, well, I'm eating the cheeseburger. You can't tell me it's wrong. You know, my divine soul is just begging for that, you know, for the spark of the cheeseburger, right? Okay, all right. As I forget it. I think it's a quote of the Talmud. Lo b'shuftani askinan. We're not dealing with fools. You know, it's this. You know, we have to use a little bit of seichel, as we say, right? So, so again, the idea is that there are these sparks that fell from heaven. They fell from heaven from this world of tohu. They're spread out throughout the world. And now you might be getting to where we're leading to. We are told that there were 288 sparks, and a lot of them, for some reason, managed to come to Egypt. Why were they in Egypt? If you think about it, Egypt at that time had really collected the wealth from most of the civilized world. During the famine, many people came to Egypt to buy their food. Joseph collected the wealth from a lot of the countries around. So much of the material from surrounding countries, wealth, was in Egypt at that time. Egypt was a superpower. Egypt had most of the wealth. And so therefore, it says in the Kabbalah that most of the sparks were found in Egypt at that point in time. So let's take a look over here. Let's read over here. 288 sparks fell by the shattering of the vessels, and during the exile in Egypt, the Jews elevated 202 of them. This is the intention of the verse. They drained Egypt of its wealth. This also explains the verse, a great mixed multitude of Arab went up with them out of Egypt. And the verse Rav, many are with you. And as the Rebbe points out, Rav means 202. So the people of Israel left Egypt with vast possessions in a material sense, but it also means that they had a vast spiritual possessions as well. The plundering of Egypt before leaving and at the sea wasn't only a physical act, it was a collection of divine sparks. The Torah speaks of a mixed multitude. The heir of Rav would join the people during the Exodus. Rav has a numerical value of 202, representing the 202 sparks that were elevated, leaving only 86 sparks left. So the Jews did a number on Egypt. They pulled out a lot of sparks when they were there. And so now we can start to appreciate why, the question I asked earlier, why did God say, but why was it so important to God? There'll be, you know, slaves there, but then they'll leave with a lot of riches. Well, that was indicative of them elevating the sparks that were there. They took with them the sparks that were there. This is actually the mystical reason why we are commanded not to go back to Egypt. If you look in the Torah, it says, there's a mitzvah, you shall not move back to Egypt. Why? What's wrong? And mystically, the answer is because the sparks that were in Egypt were all elevated. There ain't nothing left there. So there's nothing left for us to go back there. I'll just give another example. In the 1980s, big philanthropist called David Chase. He did not own Chase Bank, but he was wealthy nonetheless, David Chase. He wanted, you know, he felt so bad for what happened in Poland during the war and everything, and he wanted to revive Hasidic Judaism in Poland. And so he said, you know, I want to, you know, pay money, and I want to bring, you know, like 60 Orthodox Hasidic families to move into Warsaw or Krakow, wherever it is. And I want them to, you know, rebuild the beauty of Europe, rebuild Poland. And the Rebbe said, no, you know, we're out of Poland. We refine the sparks in Poland. we don't need to transplant a community from somewhere else to Poland. Now, there is Chabad in Poland today, of course, because Jews go back there and the Jews are there. But the Rebbe was basically saying we don't need to recreate Judaism there. They elevated. It was such wonderful Jewish communities there. They elevated all the sparks. We don't need to recreate a new community there. Leave it over here in America or in other places in Europe or places which maybe are not fully elevated, but we don't need to go back to Poland. Very interesting answer. Again, these are things for people who are privy to a higher vision. But this is the example. So there are these sparks, and so this is the reason why it was so important. God told Abraham they're going to go down to Egypt, but they're going to come out, and they're going to come out with something. They're going to, so to speak, just think of it, for the shortest exile, which is Egypt, well, not the shortest, second to shortest, they accomplished the most. 202 of all of the sparks were elevated in a single exile. And so that's why it was such an important thing to God when he said they'll go down there and they'll come with riches. The focus wasn't the money, the focus was the riches they were going to take. Let me just read over here, just Rebbe pointing out how the physical and the spiritual for a Jew can never be separated. In other words, for the Jewish people, spiritual and material matters are integrated. It's called an integrated life, by the way. A lot of people have a non-integrated life. You know, a non-integrated life where there's different compartments in your life, different parts of you. There's the part of you goes to the synagogue, part of you that eats. You know, like a lot of bad people have very non-integrated lives. Just to bring an extreme example, right? You ever see people who are like, you know, great people and they give great speeches, whatever it is, and then they do terrible things. You know, it's all story in Israel recently. There's all different people. You know, they don't have an integrated life. There's, you know, in their mind they've compartmentalized it. There's the them when they do this. There's the them when they do that. I think we spoke about Aristotle a couple of weeks ago. For a Jew, everything is integrated. Everything is about serving God. One cannot truly appreciate material wealth without investing it with spirituality. And one cannot truly be fulfilled spiritually without implementing his idea on a material level. After all, action is the main thing. It's really powerful, by the way. You cannot be a spiritual person if you don't deal with the material. And for a Jew, being material only is also not a good thing. We have to have an integration of both. That's how we can live a meaningful life. This is reflected in the great wealth associated with Exodus. The Jewish people went after the gold and the silver upon the express commandment of God himself. As Rashi explains, God begged Moses to ensure the Jewish people left in great wealth, so that as promised Abraham that following the enslavement, they would experience great prosperity would be fulfilled. And so we have over here, so far, the explanation, for the gold chasers. So hopefully now you understand a little bit about the gold chasers. Why was it so important to get the gold? Why did God make this whole trick of the 3 days? And hopefully you also understand how it applies in your life. And that is that getting gold is not about the gold in our own lives. We all chase gold to an extent. And getting the gold is not just about getting gold. It's about what's behind the gold. Getting food is not just about getting food. It's what's behind the food. And we always have to think about having integration in our life. There is no thing that is entirely spiritual, which is not material. And there is nothing that should be entirely material that is not spiritual. We have to have an integration and really find the sparks in everything that we do. So the more integrated life gets, the more peaceful it is, because every moment is meaningful. And you also don't get flustered. Your flight gets delayed, or things don't work out exactly how you want it, or timing is off. It's an integrated life. It's, you know, there's a time and place when your mission is supposed to happen, right? So you're not getting the money today, you're getting it tomorrow, whatever it is. You're not getting on the flight today, you're getting on the flight tomorrow. For some reason, there's a mission somewhere else where you have to be at that specific time. And I think we've all had our own stories where we were in the right place at the right time only because something else went wrong. And we were granted a glimpse to see a little bit how where we are right now is the place where we're supposed to be. And that is, again, the lesson from here, that in all different areas, the place where we are is where we're supposed to be. Now let's get into grave diggers. Who was the grave digger in this case? Anybody knows? Who was the grave digger in this parsha? Who was searching for a grave? This week's Torah portion.
Was it Joseph?
So Joseph was dead, yes. So we were searching for Joseph, right? Why Joseph?
Because he wanted his bones to be taken out of Egypt and brought to, buried in the land of Israel.
Very good. One of the last things that is said in Parshas Vayechi, the Torah portion of Vayechi, which is also the last portion of the book of Genesis. It's all the way at the end. I'm just going to try pulling up over here. Text. Let's take a look at text. All the way at the end. Joseph tells the Jewish people, make sure when you leave Egypt, you take me along. Let's take a look over here. Second to last verse in the book of Genesis. And Joseph adjured the children of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you shall take up my bones out of here. So Joseph knew he was going to be buried in Egypt, and he made sure to let the Jewish people know, you will leave, and make sure when you leave, you take me out. So you would assume Joseph had a lot of grandchildren in the land of Egypt. Probably 1/12 of the Jews in Egypt were his grandchildren, at least. Actually, they were one of the bigger tribes, so it might even be 1/10 or 1/9 or something. So you would assume a lot of people would be searching for his bones, right? He made them promise. It's not so long ago. He only passed away maybe 150 years before this. I forget the exact number. It's not that long ago. They knew the promise. So nevertheless, as we're going to show, nobody else went searching for Joseph except for Moses himself. Everybody forgot. Everybody got a little bit caught up in the gold and silver. You may find this surprising. Everybody got caught up in the gold and silver and somehow forgot about Joseph. So let's take a look over here. Very fascinating story. It says about Joseph, Moses finding Joseph. Because when you think about it, where was Joseph buried? Any guesses? We don't have tombs, maybe he's in a pyramid. Hard to get into. That's one opinion, he was in a pyramid. Other opinions say he was buried in the bottom of the Nile. So let's take a look over here at the different opinions about how Moshe found Joseph. Come and see how precious the mitzvahs were to Moses. While all the Jews were occupied with the spoils of Egypt, this is from the Mechilta, which is a type of Medrash, Moses was busy fulfilling a commandment. In this regard, the verse says in Proverbs, the wise-hearted choose mitzvot. How did Moses know where Joseph was buried? They said, Serach, the daughter of Asher, is the only one left for that first generation. Anybody knows who Serach was? Anybody knows a little bit about Serach? What's her history? Anybody? Anybody knows anything about Serach? We had recently somebody named their daughter Serach on the show. Anybody else? I see Don, you're trying to unmute over there. You got to press unmute. Well, somebody pressed unmute and they disappeared. Okay. Serach was the daughter of Asher. Asher was a brother of Joseph, one of the 12 tribes. Serach, what's special about her is when they found that Joseph was alive, they wanted to let their father Jacob know. But unfortunately, Jacob was an old man with a hard heart, not a hard heart, but a heavy heart, been living in pain for 22 years. And they were afraid how he would handle the news. Would it be too much? Would he have a heart attack? So they had Sarah play on, I think it was a violin or something, play on the harp, and she played a beautiful musical tone and basically through music broke the news to Jacob that Joseph is still alive. And because of that, it says Jacob promised Sarah a very, very long life. So that is why here, 210 years later, Sarah is still alive. It's a very long life. And she tells Moses, you want to know where Joseph is buried? I know where he's buried. All right. So where was he buried? Let's get back in the story. Moses went to Sarah and asked her, where was Joseph buried? She answered, the Egyptians made Joseph a coffin out of metal and sunk his body in the Nile River in order to bless the waters. Because again, the Egyptians worshipped the Nile River. Okay. Moses went to the river and said, Joseph, Joseph, God's oath to take the Jews out of Egypt is being fulfilled. And it's time to fulfill the oath you put on the Jews. Now listen, the Jews are being held back because of you. If you reveal yourself good, if not, we are free of our promise. Immediately Joseph's coffin surfaced. So what do we get from that? What we get from that is that Joseph was buried in the river. They wanted to bless, but they didn't have the excavation tools like we have today. So how was he supposed to get the coffin out of the Nile River? And so he had to work a miracle. He came there, he said, Joseph, Joseph, either you come out or we're going. You know, we tried our best. I found you. I know where you are. Just come up. And he came up and he took him out of the river. There's actually another opinion that says that he put a little piece in the water, a little paper that helped to raise the coffin. It says that that piece of water was stolen by a kid. And that kid later on, when they made the golden calf, stuck that piece of paper in the golden calf. And that's what made the golden calf alive. It's an interesting tidbit. But I don't want to get lost over there. All right. Rabbi Natan relates, so different opinions as to what happened. Joseph's remains were in the tomb of kings. Moses stood at the tomb and cried, Joseph, Joseph. Immediately Joseph's coffin began to shake, and Moses took the coffin. This is what the verse implies when it says Moses took Joseph's remains with him. And so we have two opinions of exactly how they got Joseph's tomb. Either Sarah told him it was buried in the river and he had to work a miracle to get it out, or it was in a tomb, probably a pyramid, and he got it from there. But regardless, while everybody was busy with getting gold and silver, Moses, while everybody was being a gold chaser, Moses was a grave digger. He was looking for Joseph. And it's kind of strange when you think about it. Why only Moses? Why not everybody else? Where was everybody else at this point in time?
They were searching for the gold.
Huh?
Searching for the gold.
They were searching for the gold, right? So did nobody else think to pause for a moment and get Joseph too? Nobody had nobody thought of it? Only Moses? Moses knew about the gold too. So you're right. They were all going for the gold. But why didn't? Why was only Moses the only one, to the point where the Medrash says he was the wise one? Nobody else was wise? So the answer is, and this is what I advertise the classes as a priorities. Both of these were mitzvahs, so to speak. It was a mitzvah to get the gold. God had commanded them to get the gold. And they were also made a promise, which is, you have to keep a promise, that's a mitzvah too, to take Joseph out of Egypt. And so the Jewish people had two mitzvahs in front of them. And they said, we would love to go searching for Joseph, but we've got this mitzvah. We've got to get the gold. We've got a mitzvah. And yes, there is a mitzvah, but we have to prioritize in life. And that's really what the second lesson we have from today is from Moses. Moses is called the smart one because he knew how to prioritize and not get lost. So let me show you a medrash here. There's a medrash that gives an example for what happened between Moses and the Jewish people. The medrash said that Moses was the smartest. So the Rebbe writes like this. A medrash teaching seems to imply, Moses personally went to bring the coffin of Joseph along, and the medrash praises him for being occupied with the mitzvah while the rest of the Jewish people were busy with their own gold and silver. Therein lies a lesson for every Jew. As we stand on the threshold of Exodus from our exile, which we will leave with great wealth, it is important to clarify this matter. a famous Hasidic parable tells of a king who opened his doors wide and allowed any citizen to obtain an audience. The simple folk all entered the palace, but they were so blinded by the beauty and splendor of the outer rooms that they remained mesmerized there, missing their opportunity. Those who were wiser continued into the inner chambers. However, it takes true wisdom, and even that is sometimes not enough, to not get carried away with the opulence and the beauty of the king's inner chambers, and to remember the main purpose is to get to the king himself. The parable indicates that wisdom alone does not always suffice. For a purely intellectual perspective, the precious items found in the king's outer chambers may be so valuable that they will provide you throughout your lifetime in this world and in the next without ever reaching the king himself. Therefore, it is important to clarify that even when Egypt is available to be plundered by the express command of God, we should not forget there is something more important, the connection to Joseph every generation. And so this is an important lesson, and I'll tell you why it's important, especially today, and I told you it connects with the Rebbe. Yes, Don?
I have two questions or two issues here. Thinking of keeping your eyes on the prize,
Yeah.
and I was thinking of a teacher of mine who taught Bible and said, when you see a woman, look only at her eyes as a mirror of her soul. And people tend to see attractiveness rather than the depth of the person and the soul. But the question I had, we read a few moments ago that Joseph's body was embalmed. Would you address the dichotomy? And I know it was a common practice in Egypt to embalm, but here it is, we're praising, or at least noting, that Joseph was embalmed, but later Jewish teaching discourages, if not forbids, embalming.
Right. So the specific question of embalming, I remember looking into it a few weeks ago. I don't remember the answer to that question, so I'll have to look that up later. But it's actually a bigger question than that. The fact that Joseph was embalmed is not such a big question, because once he passed away, his family didn't have much power. The bigger question is that he embalmed his father, which was Jacob, and he was the viceroy at that point. That's really the bigger question. Why would he embalm his father? I think I addressed it, but I don't remember. I remember discussing it. It was a couple of weeks ago in the Torah portion. It's a good question.
But it was certainly the custom, the minhag.
It was the custom back then.
Embalm.
It was the custom. The question is why did Joseph do it with his father Jacob?
And when did the prohibition against embalming develop? Or was it even a prohibition at that time?
Well, at that time there were no official prohibitions, but they did know of the commandments, even though they were not commanded about them. All right, but it is a little tangential to what we are getting to here, but it's a good question, and so I'll look it up after the class, and I'll try and find it and get back to you. But to what we're getting to over here, we said there's, so to speak, two mitzvahs over here. There's a mitzvah of collecting gold, and there's a mitzvah of getting Joseph. And really, you could do both. You could go get Joseph and then get your gold. But all the Jews were distracted. And it gives the example. It says the example. You walk into a palace, you get stuck in antechambers getting all the wealth instead of going into the king. And the Medrash says Moses was the smart one. He knew what is the most important thing is first getting Joseph, because Joseph is part of our lineage. He is the one that, so to speak, brought us here on God's command. And he said, he promised us we will leave. It's his promised us that has helped us survive. And we need to make sure we take him with us. And in a sense, this also ties into something that the Rebbe spoke about in his inaugural address. When the Rebbe accepted upon himself the leadership in 57, 51, he gave the Rebbe gave a couple short talks, and they all really, you can see how they developed over the years, the basis of everything that he did. But one of them, the Rebbe spoke about how there are three types of love. It says that there's the love of God, the love of Torah, and the love of Jewish people. And the Rebbe said we have to start with the love of our fellow, because that is what is going to lead to the other ones. And it's a very interesting point. When you think about it, that's really how the Rebbe, so to speak, developed it later. Because at that time, there were a lot of people, and unfortunately till today, I've heard stories. Unfortunately, there are segments within the Orthodox Jewry who still don't hold on to that yet. We're trying to get to them, but I'm not here to blast some Orthodox Jews. What I am trying to say is there are some people who hold precious the Torah or God so much, they're willing to throw Jews to the wayside. They are willing to say, well, if they don't keep the Torah yet, or then, they don't love God, well, then who cares about them? Or they're not Jewish. I'm sure, some groups might call you a goy or whatever it is. And so the Rebbe said, no, we have to start with love of our fellow. And that's the starting point. And again, it's about priorities. They tell the story once there was some ultra-Orthodox Jew came to visit a Chabad house, and he asked the rabbi, how come you're dealing with his low life over here? He doesn't eat any kosher, he drives in Shabbat, everything. And so he told him, don't you know he's a grandson of a famous tzaddik? Oh, he's a grandson of a famous tzaddik. Oh wow, okay. He says, which tzaddik? He says, he's the grandson of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so this was the Rebbe's message: is start with the love of somebody else, start with the feeling, and that's really what God wants. And we see that over and over. You see in the Torah, you look in the Torah, Moses was willing to have his name erased from the whole Torah if God did not save the Jewish people. And so we in our lives, this is a lesson not to get lost. Hopefully most of us here probably don't suffer from those issues, of course, but I do have to present this as basic to Chabad and Hasidic philosophy. And that's why I always like to say Chabad is both a movement and a philosophy. And the movement and the actions that we do is based on these philosophies. And that's why it's important kind of that you understand these philosophies. These are the philosophies that drive Chabad from day one into this outreach type of thing, because we have, for example, those speeches of the Rebbe, the love of God, the love of Torah, the love of Jewish people, and it's love, and you can't have one without the other. You cannot love the Torah and love God and not love your fellow. It doesn't work. You cannot have one without the other. And also in our lives, this is a lesson in our lives too, is Don gave a great example over there of looking somebody in the eye, always remembering what's the priority, not getting distracted. And this is really the biggest distraction. Sometimes you can have two things that are a mitzvah, right? In other words, you have two paths. They're both good. In other words, we tend to think life is a choice between evil and good, but it's not always like that. Sometimes we have a choice of two good things, but one of them is the right thing at this point in time, and one of them is the wrong thing. And we always have to remember to prioritize. There was today is also the yard site of the previous Rebbe. And in Russia, back in Russia, one time he had one of his older followers wrote him a letter, and he said, how come when I write you letters, the response time is so slow? And there's this young schnook, young schnook is a young chassid in town. Every time he writes a letter, he gets an answer so quick, and he gets multiple answers. You barely answer me. He said, listen, he says, you're asking great questions. Nothing wrong with what you're asking, but your questions, they're very limited they're not so into action. You're asking deep philosophical questions or deep great ideas or about prayer and whatnot. He says this other young schnook, he's asking ideas of action. He's helping people out. He's a community activist, or even maybe not. Maybe he's asking questions about what he should do. He's focused on the action, getting things done. He said, I'll answer you, but his is a priority. We live in a world of action. And the Rebbe said the same thing is actually each and every single one of us, whether you're old or young, we should bring that youth in ourselves. Youth are known for getting things done. And the Rebbe said it's not an excuse, whether you're old or you're young, get things done. That's where it's at. That's where the important, that's where the priority is. As we get older, we can tend to, I don't know if it's true, because who am I to talk? I don't know if this is true. But you can tend to think of, I've lived my life. I'll let the world run, let it go. I'll just do my thing. But no, we have to we live in a world of action. And if we're on this world, if there's something that we can do and accomplish and give to others or even to ourselves and do more, we definitely have to get those things done. And so again, it's focusing our lives on those priorities. And that's really this lesson today. We could be goal chasers, but sometimes we have to be sounds really bad. Grave diggers? Well, not being grave diggers, but we want to be the Moses. We want to be not getting distracted by the gold. We want to not be distracted by the treasures. We want to make sure we focus on what's good. So we had, again, 2 lessons today, just to recap. We had 2 beautiful lessons today. One lesson, the first lesson was remembering that for a Jew, we live an integrated life. Spiritual is physical, physical is spiritual. If we're trying to get the gold, it's not because we need the gold. If we're trying to eat food, it's not because we need the food. It's because of the godliness that's in there. We go on vacation, our flight is delayed. It's all because there's some mission for us over there. And second of all, remembering this lesson that the Rebbe said is always priority. And we should always remember that loving our fellows is a priority. And but number 2, just in general, having priorities in life. And life is not always a debate of right and wrong. Sometimes it's 2 great things, but one may be a little too out there, and we have to do something that can have a positive effect on the world around us. Of course, we have to elevate ourselves to affect the world around us, but that always has to be the goal. Even when we spend time in meditation and elevating our own spiritual self, it's always we can be better people, and then also bring it to the world around us. Never be fully self-focused. And that is my gig for today. I want to say I did have some videos, but I gave you the ideas that I was going to show you the videos anyways. But I did finally figure out what the issue was, and it's odd. Thank God, every answer for every question. I should stop the Facebook because it's not so important for Facebook.